Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. Today we're gonna make a really nice blazer because I really need an everyday all-time blazer. You know, something that just works with everything, that is comfortable, that looks nice, and that is sturdy enough to not just, you know, collapse or like get folded and wrinkly and whatever. So I designed this piece right here, and we're gonna make the blazer in today's video. I already started with 1/2, as you can see over there, so that I can manage my time a little bit better, because I am actually at a fair this weekend, so I don't have that much time. But if you're interested in that, you can go over to my Instagram and check everything out there, as I am posting loads of stuff from the fair. It's like a crafting fair, which is really nice. One of the biggest fairs here in Germany about crafting and DIY and stuff like that. Super interesting. Love it every time I go every year, and I just meet everybody from the DIY community there, the creators, all of the partners and everything like that. So super fun. If you haven't heard of it yet, it's the H&H Cologne in Cologne. And yeah, so that is what I was doing this weekend. I'm not sure yet if this video drops on Sunday or a Monday. It depends on how, you know, far I get with editing and stuff like that. So hopefully I'll be on time. But anyways, I wrote a book. You probably already know about this, but I wrote a sewing book which is gonna be published and released on the 18th of March, so in just a week, which is crazy. I am super excited. If you haven't already, go ahead and pre-order the book. Support me and my channel and myself and everything what I do, my art and stuff like that, by buying this book. It has 13 different exclusive designs in it, with obviously step-by-step tutorials, pictured and written instructions, and yeah, super feminine, very suitable for spring, summer, obviously throughout the whole year, because we also have long pants and a blazer and stuff like that, but very me, very feminine and happy and colorful and stuff like that. So if you're interested in that, the link will be in the description down below. A small explanation to the shop that I'm referring you to. It is actually a shop that gives double the amount to the authors and translators. So if you want to support me twofold, go ahead and order my book through the link in the description down below. And also, if you find any other book that you're interested in you're living in Germany and have your address in Germany, go ahead and check the website and search for that book there, because everybody who sells over there gets double the amount, which is amazing. Obviously, you are not paying that. The website is kind enough to, you know, just give a little bit of their portion to us. So thank you so much for that, to you and to the website. Link is in the description down below. As with every jacket and blazer and outerwear and stuff like that, formal wear as well, there's a lot of prep work that we have to do. Obviously, I included the interfacing guide in my sewing instructions. Link to all of that is in the description down below, obviously, because we need to iron on a lot of interfacing tape with a stay stitch and stuff like that. So blazers and jackets like that have a lot of internal stuff going on to make them fit and fall nicely, drape perfectly, and not be wrinkly and, you know, look a bit odd. So make sure to go ahead and prep your pieces according to the interfacing guide in my sewing instructions. And now we're gonna jump right into the tutorial. We're gonna start off with the front pieces, because we have a welt pocket right here. And to be able to sew that in, we have to close the front dividing seam first. So that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna put right sides together here, match up all of the notches in between here, and close the front dividing seam. I marked my welt pocket placement on my wrong side already, but the pen is gonna disappear while ironing. So I made sure to mark the placements with some pins so that I know exactly where I need to draw in the quarters for my pocket once everything is ironed. For ironing, we're just gonna iron everything open like that. And I'm using a pretty thick fabric because I wanted to use a different fabric, but I had just a little bit, not enough of that fabric. I think I was missing 50 centimeters, so a little amount. And I definitely didn't want to do anything else than a white color. This was the fabric. It would have been like a fake knit, would have looked amazing, but didn't have enough. So I was looking around my studio and couldn't find everything suitable in that color, except for the fabric that I'm using now, which is a boucle. It's upholstery fabric, so rather thick. I think it's gonna work out really, really nicely, honestly. If you remember, I used this to replicate the Dior dress that Dua Lipa wore at some point, but I made it last year. I made like a mini version of the gown she wore, and I really like the boucle. And now the rest, the remaining fabric, also finds a purpose. So I hope this is gonna work out nicely with the shawl color that I have in my design. Okay, now that that is ironed open, I can transfer the placement of the pockets to the right side and prep everything for the welt pockets. So you have to be super exact anyways. And my tip for everybody who does not know how to master welt pockets yet, draw on everything, every little thing on every piece, because everything then is easier. So we need our welt pocket right here. It's just a rectangle. It's the same size plus seam allowance as the actual drawing that we made right here. And we're going to iron this along the fold line and make sure that this is flat and stays flat. So a clapper like this is super helpful for that. Especially if you have fabric that it does not want to be ironed that nicely. I think I'm using some sort of cotton blend. Anyways, now we have this prepped like that. And I want to draw on my actual welt onto this as well. As you can see, it's plus seam allowance. So I am drawing on a rectangle here with the width of 1 centimeter. And then we're gonna draw on 1 centimeter on the sides. And the pocket itself, I think, measures 14 centimeters. So I'll double check that everything is right, and actually 14 centimeters here. And I'll transfer the same thing to the other side as well, because now the corner points can now be matched up with the corners in here. So the interesting corners at the moment are the lower corners. So I'm gonna grab a pin, stab in that corner, make sure that the open portion points upwards. The fold needs to point downwards. And this gets matched up with the lower left corner in this case. So like this, same to the other side, stab it like that, and then pin them together. And for good measure, I want to add another one in the center, so I can make sure that this also matches up with the line that we drew, like that. And now we're gonna sew from this corner all the way here to the other corner. Since the welt is 1 centimeter wide, it should match up with your line of the upper welt seam. This edge should match up with that drawn in line. Just as a security measure, you can just check that. If that matches up, you did it correctly. So now we're gonna go from that corner to that corner. Everything is now sewn on, so we can take out the pins and check if everything went well to be. Now is very frightening part, because we actually have to cut into the pocket. So you want to cut in the center of that pocket. So just be super careful and do a little snip, and then you can, while it sits on the table, snip into the pocket like that, so you have a little bit more of control right here. And you only want to go like 1 centimeter before you reach that short edge of the welt, because there you need to go diagonally towards that corner point. You don't want to cut all the way towards that stitching line, but just a little bit before. And same to the other side, like that. You also need to cut towards the edges on the upper corners, otherwise you're not going to be able to turn the welt towards the inside. And now we can fold this up like this. Short sides go into the front piece, so towards the wrong side of the fabric. And you can already see how everything will work together. Now I like to just iron everything flat. You don't necessarily need the markings that much anymore, so I will just iron them because I'd rather have everything lay flat like so. And now if you peel away the sides, you can see these rectangles right here. And these need to be sewn onto the welt from the corner point to the upper corner point. Be super exact with that as well. Just go right here and bar tack the small portions here. Okay, seems to have worked pretty nicely. Not that you can tell with this fabric, but it looks good in person. So now it's time to actually add the pocket right here. Cut this out of lining. And the special thing about the pocket is that it's not symmetrical. Like, there is a 1 centimeter difference because we have the welt. So the pocket that sits further towards the shell needs to be smaller than the one that sits in the back because the welt is, you know, in there as well. So just iron the lining for the pocket along the fold line. And then you know exactly which side goes where. So it needs to go like this with the short side being on top. And once we flip this, we can put right sides of the shorter side together with the welt. You can just line it up with the seam allowance of the welt because the pocket is the same size. I also like to put another one in the center. And now you just want to go right over top of that line or a tiny bit off. Not inside the pocket, but towards the seam allowance. I like to just double sew because then it's more secure. So let's just sew this on. And I want to iron this downwards so that everything sits nicely. And now once you fold your pocket up, you can match it up with the upper portion of your welt, which I also like to just iron in that fold line so that I just know exactly where to sew. Now we put this over top and just how everything sits like this. I'm not gonna make it align because also the welt has 5mm seam allowance, so it's not gonna perfectly fit. But I want to align the sides like that. And now I'm gonna sew into that fold line here. And that is what it looks like. I'm gonna iron it towards the top very lightly because I want to iron it from the right side so that everything sits correctly and looks nice from the front, like so. I want to do that with a lot of pressure, heat, and accuracy. And I'm just gonna cool it down with my clapper, which I'm now going to close temporarily with some pins. You can also do that with some hand stitches. I find too, I don't know, I think it's not necessary, but you can do that too. Then it doesn't bubble up like with pins. This for me is enough, like that. And now it's time to close the sides of the pocket. So once you peel away the shell on both sides, you can just go down at 1 centimeter on both sides to close the pockets, and then that's done. One last, more cosmetic thing is I want to add bar tacks down the sides of my welt just to prevent any ripping out or whatsoever, just because I don't really see if I did it nicely or not because the fabric is so confusing. So I'm just going to add some zigzag bar tacks down here, 1 centimeter, right on top of that seam. And then for me, the welt pocket is done. You don't have to do that. It is more secure, but technically your welt should be fine without it. You also don't need to do the zigzag version of a bar tack. You can just go over it with a normal straight stitch a few times. You can also do a teeny tiny bit horizontally if you want that. This is up to you, but I'm gonna add the zigzag bar tack and then the welt pocket, and the front is completely done. And with the shoulder seam now completely done, we can go ahead and work on our back piece, because there the back dividing seam is not yet finished. This is my finished other side, but you can see the back piece right here. And we have the back dividing seam open still. So I'm gonna grab my side back piece and match it up with my back dividing seam, so with my back piece right here. Put right sides together, and same as with the front dividing seam, we're just gonna match every notch up and sew along the side here. We're gonna iron the seam allowance also open, and with that done, we can already close our shoulder seams. So right here is the open shoulder, and we're going to put right sides of our front piece onto our back. Now you can see that there is the shawl collar on there still. The shawl collar gets twisted like that and gets sewn onto the back neck cutout right here in a second, not yet. But it is very handy to draw in your stitching line in that resulting corner right here, because we need to match up that corner with the stitching line in our back shoulder seam right here. So these two need to match up. Now with that in place, we can match up the rest of this and just sew until this corner, not any further, just this length right here. You can sew off as usual. Let's iron the seam allowance open here as well. If you have a thinner fabric than me, iron the seam allowance into the back, but because mine is so thick it would be too bulky and wouldn't look good, so I'm just gonna iron it open like that. And while we're at it, we can close the center back of our shawl collar. So this is the front piece, and it ends in this flappy thingy right here, which is the shawl collar. And you're just gonna match it up with the other front piece and close that center back piece right here. Also iron it open, and then we can match this up with our back neck. Let's close this. Iron this open so that it lays nice and flat. And now you can see these two look about the same length, which they are. So before we put these together, we actually have to cut the corner towards the stitching line right here. I always like to end just a teeny tiny bit before the stitching line actually begins. And now we can wrap this around the corner and match everything up. Still, I like to start in the center back, if I can find it, right here, and then go around to the other side. It should look like this. And now with that done, we can go ahead and close the back neck. That is what it looks like, and we want to iron everything into the collar. Usually if we have any other collar, you would also do that. You would iron everything into the collar band. Since this is a shawl collar, we don't have a collar band because it's all attached in the shawl. So we're just gonna iron everything into the shawl collar. Right here you can clip into the seam allowance. For me, my fabric irons flat like that as well. But for any other fabric, you might want to do that. Same with the seam allowance here. You might want to clip into the seam allowance so that lays nicer. Actually, I will do that as well, just because the back neck is small and it just takes out the tension, I guess. So like this. And now shawl is prepped. You can see that's why my fabric is nice to work with in areas like this, because even if I didn't do it tidy enough, you wouldn't be able to see it, which is pretty nice. We're done with this area now, so we can carry on with our armhole and our sleeve, because we have an open arm's eye right here. So for that, we have to actually prep the sleeve, so I'm gonna put this away for a second. So, sleeve time. This is the sleeve, and you can see these fold line markings right here. And I drew them onto my wrong side so that I am able to just fold these and stitch along that area that I drew in. So each fold consists of 3 lines, a center line and then 2 on the opposite sides. The center line is the fold line actually, and the 2 opposites need to match up, and that's the point where everything gets sewn on. So I am gonna go ahead and match up these right here, and then also down here we're gonna match points up as well, like that. And I'm just gonna go around or along the sleeve hem and do that to every fold so that I'm ready to sew everything in one go. And now I can sew in all of the fold lines, and I'm gonna sew right until that marked dot right here, so the end of each fold line. This is now what it looks like, and I want to flatten these folds. I want to match up the marked center line with the actual seam that I did, and we're going to fix that in place in a second with a bar tack as well. So let's iron this flat like so. This not only debulks the area here because we have a lot of fabric And me, especially with upholstery fabric, thick fabric, this is gonna be a mess otherwise. But this also shapes the folds nicer. So it has more depth. It just looks so much better. So I always like this for sleeves especially. See the depth here? And it just makes a really nice puffy sleeve this way. So now we need to fix these in place with some bar tacks. And right where they end, I'm just gonna do a little bar tack here, 3 stitches back and forth horizontally, like this 4 times. And then that sleeve is prepped as well. And lastly, to fix the folds in place down here, we're actually already going to attach our facing right here. And we're also going to understitch this stitching line right here. And we're going to iron the edge of the seam towards the wrong side. As you can see, I am using a different fabric to my shell for the facing. That's just to debulk this whole thing. Usually you would use the same as for the shell, but it's difficult to sew this flat, like make it as clean as possible with the thick fabric that I'm using. I don't want to add another thick layer to the inside here, so that's why I just opted for some cotton poplin, which works perfectly fine, and I think it's also a tiny bit nicer on the skin in that area, so that's what I did here. With the sleeve now done, this is what it looks like from the right side. Looks pretty nice, I think. We can put it into our arm's eye. So I'm just gonna grab my jacket. And I always like to add the sleeve before we close the side seam. I think it's much easier. You have so much more room to maneuver everything around. So that's why I always do it that way. If you like to close your side seams beforehand, you can obviously also do it that way. It doesn't really matter in the end. It's just a matter of preference, to be honest. So we're gonna match up sleeve and arm's eye. We have a few spots that we need to match up, which are the sleeve notches right here, the shoulder notch, which I seem to find. Well, we'll do that in a second. And then the other side seam and front sleeve notch. Since both of these match up perfectly, there should be no folds if you have any troubles matching the two up, because they are curved oppositely. You can always cut towards the stitching line in your arm's eye, take out the tension of that seam and open it up a tiny bit more so that you can actually pin it to the curve of your sleeve cap. For my fabric it seems to be fine, because upholstery fabric, like that. And now I'm going to sew the sleeve in. To iron the seam, we're going to use a round tailor's hem like that. It's just going to make it easier to iron the seam allowance into the sleeve. With that ironed from the wrong side, I like to just iron it from the right side. Depending on your fabric, you might just want to steam it or not iron it at all. My fabric is thick enough, so I'm just going to go for it. But you might not want to do that. And that is the shoulder. Really nice. Now it's time to actually close the side seam. And as usual, we can do the full side seam, which also means the sleeve side seam. So first I like to match the underarm, because I want the seams to have a perfect junction. Make sure that when you sew this, the seam allowance points into the sleeve. And then right here, there's another thing that I want to match up, which is the seam for the sleeve hem facing. So I'm just going to use a pin again to match this up to get a perfect junction right here. And the hem itself should also therefore match up. Same thing, seam allowance should face into the facing. It's already fixed in place because of the understitching anyways, but just in case you skipped it, which you shouldn't do. And then the rest right here, all of the notches should be matched up as well. So let's go. The seam also gets ironed open. And for the sleeve, I'm going to use a sleeve board, make it look nice and tidy. With this now sewn together, we can just go ahead and flip everything right sides out, and then also leave the facing on the inside and give it a good iron again, because we flattened that one side now, like that. I definitely want to fix the facing later on, either with a hand stitch or with a top stitch in place, because otherwise it's just gonna fall out because of the bulk. Might be different with your fabric, but with mine, definitely. For now, I'm just gonna pin it in place though, because it can dry and cool down in shape like that. Okay, and that is the shell already done. So with the shell now done, we can continue with the lining. The lining is pretty straightforward. It's almost the same as the shell, minus the pockets, basically. Otherwise it's the same. The back piece is not parted in the back dividing seam. I decided to do a dart instead. And on top of that we have the movement fold, so I'm gonna go over that with you guys. So the movement fold itself is, as the name suggests, something that just makes it easier and better to move around in your jacket. It's pretty important, otherwise you can risk your lining ripping out. So you want to fold your piece with the wrong side facing out, and I like to just iron the movement fold in. And once the movement fold is ironed in, we can go ahead and mark our stitching lines. You're gonna find on your back piece the stitching lines for your size. They're gonna go in top and bottom. From the actual center back, which is this notch right here, measured inwards a tiny bit. And I'm just gonna transfer that curved line onto my lining like that and top stitch right along that line. And this is gonna fix the movement fold in place, makes it easier to move in. So let's go ahead and top stitch along the marked lines. With that in place, we can just fold it open like that and iron the back piece flat. So now the center back is in place as well, and you have a little bit of space to be able to move around like that. So let's close our darts, and then we can also put the back neck facing onto our piece. So same thing with the facing in my sleeves. I used some cotton poplin instead of my shell fabric because it's just not bulky. I'm just gonna match up the center back. The center back is the stitching line here, not like in between here or anything else. And then the rest as well, like that. So let's put this in and close the darts. Okay, let's go ahead and iron everything flat. I'm just gonna iron the seam allowance into the lining just because it wants to lay like that anyways. And then the darts I'm gonna iron into, or like towards the back. Okay, that's the back prepped. We can go ahead and put the side front lining onto our front facing. In our side front lining piece, you're gonna find a couple of notches in the hem area, and those are the movement fold vertically to the whole lining piece. So what we're actually gonna do is put right sides together of our lining, right at that lower notch right here, the fold notch. And we're gonna just flip it up and put a pin in right where the other notch is, the one that sits above. That is until we are going to close this short section down here. So just from that pin, which is the notch up here, down to that fold line. And that's just gonna finish that small portion of the lining that is gonna be lower than the front facing, so that we have an even hemline to match up and so on and so forth, that goes nicely and finished into the movement fold in our length of our lining. So let's do that. Same thing on the other side, and then we can finish the lining. With that done, we can flip this right sides out, get this nice edge at that movement fold, and then we want to cut towards that stitching line right where the notch is, so that we can actually use that seam allowance there for our front dividing seam right here. So I'm just gonna go ahead and iron that in, the movement fold and, you know, this portion right here. think I'm also going to iron the movement fold into the rest of my hemline right here, because it'll be done anyways at some point. And this way it just sits a bit nicer, like that. And now, once I put right sides of my lining and my facing, my front facing together, you should find that the seam allowance starts right where the stitching line of our hem right here starts. So just match up all of the seams and everything should fit together perfectly. Right here somewhere is the bust notch up here, and then obviously also right here in the shoulder seam. And with that we can close the front dividing seam as well and have a nice edge right here. And then once that's done, same thing, we're going to close the shoulder seams, make the puff in our lining sleeves, so we have also the folds in there. We're just going to do exactly the same that we did in the shell. Then we're going to put that into our lining arm side, close the side seams, and then the lining is completely finished as well. And I'll be back once that's done. The lining is now done. Before we put that in, we have those tabs again. If you watched any of my if you watched any of my jacket coat videos that are lined, you always put these into your arm's eye at specific points into your shell, and then you fix the other end to the respective points in the lining, so that once you put your coat off, or take off your jacket or whatever, the lining sleeve doesn't come out with that. So we're gonna put these in here as well. I am going to sew one right here at the underarm area into my shell, and then I'm gonna put the other one right where my shoulder seam is, right here. Same on the other side, obviously. I'm just gonna bar tack them onto the seam allowance, and then we can put our lining onto our shell. And because we have short sleeves, we are going to turn everything right sides out through the hem, which means also that we have to hand sew a little portion of the hem seam, which is fine. Usually I leave a little bit open right here at the sleeve lining on one of the lining sleeves, so that I can turn everything right side out through that lining opening, and then you can just machine stitch that close because it's inside the sleeve, nobody's gonna see it. But because this is too short for this whole bulky jacket, maybe if you're using a thinner fabric, you could probably also turn it over through the lining, but I can't. That's why I have to do it the old-fashioned way, through the hem, which is totally fine. I'm just gonna hand stitch everything close. So to do that, we are going to match up our lining with our shell. I always like to start in the center back right here and work my way towards the hem. So we have the corner points right here that need to be matched up, and then this point right here where the shawl collar starts. So just gonna match up that corner that I marked, then right here, this corner, the center front line, and then down here we have an attached facing. So this is going to go upwards. Right here we have a notch, that's the point where we have to fold it, and this is gonna go up, and we're gonna stitch this in one go until a centimeter before the edge, so until the stitching line right here, stitching line. And this seam allowance here can then be used to sew the facing on. So this is how this is gonna end up in the very end, like this. These all match up like that, as you can see. That's how I made this pattern. That's how I usually make my patterns. And to be able to sew this, I want to do that in one go. So I'm going to go until that point right here, back tack, skip over this bulky seam right here and start to do this seam right here. And then I'm gonna go right away into this seam and stitch all the way across until I reach my front dividing seam in my facing and in my shell. These should both match up. So this stitching line here should match up with the seam here. That's just how I like to do it. Obviously you can, do that in multiple steps, but that's how I'm going to do that. Same to the other side, and then we can iron everything. So I'm gonna iron this seam flat right here. And then also we need to cut towards the stitching line in this corner right here. I want to cut down the seam allowance right here. Otherwise this edge is going to be filled with fabric and it's not going to turn nicely. Then in the curved area here at the shawl collar, I definitely want to cut towards the stitching line so that the seam allowance lays nicer. And then we're going to repeat the same on the other side. Okay. And with that, we can turn the jacket right sides out. So I'm gonna start down here in the corner. And now with everything turned right sides out, we can go around the collar and everything and iron. Just making sure that these corners also are sharp as possible with a fabric like this, obviously, but still. And now we iron in a specific way. So for everything along the shawl collar, we want the ditch of the seam to be visible on the front, on the shell side. And we want to do that up until right here, where that edge is. Right here is basically this fold line, and then here we want the ditch of the seam to be visible on the facing side only. So I'm going to do the ironing in 3 stages. I'm going to start like so. And I'm going to work my way around until I reach the other edge of my shawl collar, which is right here. So until here I'm going to iron. And for everything below that, I am going to turn my jacket the other way round so that now my facing lays up, and I'm going to wiggle it around until everything lays flat. And now I can go around this edge, making sure that the facing side is the side where the ditch is visible. So right here we have this kind of merging point, this changing point. So we want to make sure to actually iron that in nicely. And you want to take your time with this. You want to make it right, because I feel like you always see if something's self-made or not with the ironing job, I guess. So now this is what it will look like in the end. We're going to add buttons here, and then this is the diagonal section below the buttons. So same thing on the other side. You can also see how the lining works out here. It's just a small itty bitty point right here. Okay, and let's iron here as well. Okay, that's done. Let's continue with the hem facing. So you're gonna find some notches in your hem, which marks the fold line for your hem facing. This should align exactly with the line of your front that we already ironed up. So essentially you just need to go along the fold line here and iron the hem facing up as well. Okay, like that. I'm just gonna quickly fix the hem facing in place temporarily because we're gonna do the sleeves next, like that. Before I do anything for the sleeves, I always like to put my lining inside of the sleeve so I know exactly where my seam allowances meet up, because you don't want to twist your sleeve on the inside. Let's quickly take out all of these temporarily placed pins. And now I know that this is my side seam that needs to match up with the side seam of my facing. So I can go in between lining and shell inside the sleeve now and grab exactly what I just said, like this. Right sides facing is always the easiest if you already prep it like that. Grip tightly and pull the whole thing out, sleeve, shell and lining. And now you should be able to just pin these together very easily. They should be the same size. If not, doesn't matter, just fold the lining a tiny bit more, because there are folds in it anyways. With that prepped, we can sew around the lining facing. With the sleeves now lined and everything fixed in place, it's actually time for a little bit of hand sewing, because I decided that I don't want to have any top stitches on my sleeves, but I need to fix the facing so that it doesn't flop down when you're wearing the jacket. So there are a few options that you can do. I'm probably gonna use it's not the actual way to do it. Usually you would go inside here and then fix every seam allowance together with the respective seam allowance of your facing. I don't really want to do that. It's too much. Like, it's such a small area. Nah, don't feel like it. So I'm just gonna go ahead and do some blind stitches into my seams right here. I don't care if they're visible on my facing, so that's totally fine with me. I just don't want to have them visible on my shell side. So I'm gonna go around my sleeve hem here and stretch everything into position essentially. So I want to have everything lay correctly without any folds, and then I'm just gonna fix them in place with some pins. Already did it here. And now I'm just gonna grab a needle and some, in my case, white-ish thread. This one should be fine. And I'm gonna go in from the inside and just fix everything in place with a few stitches. Nothing too fancy. They should just be, you know, strong, invisible, and that's it. Technically, probably you could go around with a blind stitch-ish, kinda. It's not really a blind stitch, but you could technically just move around the cuff. Maybe I'm gonna do that. You know, like with a big distance on the inside and a small distance on the outside, because everything like that will be covered up by the lining anyways. Essentially, you would do the same on the inside of your cuff. I'm just not feeling like I don't feel that small space. And that's what it's gonna look like on the inside. So bigger stitches here, invisible stitches on the right side. And while stitching, obviously I'm making sure to never catch my lining. So I keep my distance to the lining. Okay, last stitch. And now I'm just gonna knot this off and cut off my thread. And that's basically how I'm gonna fix my facing up. It's not visible on the right side for my fabric, so that's fine. And on the inside, since we have the movement fold in the lining as well, it's gonna cover it up like this. So it's gonna overlay everything by 2 centimeters anyways. So that's pretty nice, like that. And then nothing will be visible, and you're not gonna feel it either, because you're gonna go from the inside, it's gonna move the lining downwards, and then you're fine and nothing will be feelable. So let's do the same on the other side. So as you can see, this is now fixed in place. Obviously you don't want to rip on it, but it should be fine and sturdy. Now before we do anything else, we also need to, you know, hand sew a little bit up here. I want to fix the lining onto the tabs that we added, just because I will forget otherwise, so I'm gonna do that really quickly. I'm just gonna, you know, put them onto the lining portion of that area. So this one goes under the armpit, and then the other one up here goes onto the shoulder seam right here. And I'm gonna bar tag those in. Okay, everything is fixed together now. Let's do this portion up here, which means the collar area, very important. So basically I want to fuse the seam of my back necks together in shell and lining. So this goes from that one corner point in my shell right here and in my lining obviously to the other side, and I want to very sturdily sew this together by hand and until here. So for that I'm gonna grab a thick thread. So this is a 30, size 30. This should be sufficient because it has strength. It's not gonna rip on me or, you know, on the forces that you're gonna put your back neck through. I'm gonna double thread again just to get it even sturdier, not my end. And then I am going to put the seam allowance towards the inside. This is important because we ironed the seam allowance facing towards the inside before, and we're essentially just gonna stitch along the seam allowances. So I'm just gonna start right here and I'm gonna work my way along the neck area like that. Doesn't need to be pretty, just needs to be functional. Okay, that's it. I'm gonna put a knot in here and cut the thread. I can leave a long tail because it's on the inside, it doesn't matter. And now this is sewn together without any visible top stitches, any visible stitches in general, but it is sturdy now, as you can see, very nice. And now it's time to close our hemline down here. I like to leave some space in the hem, maybe like that. And I'm going to close the rest by machine first. So essentially what you're going to do, you're going to go inside and turn all of this wrong sides out. Now, because we have this prepped finished edge, you're going to turn the seam allowance up here to match up with the seam allowance of your hem facing. This might look a little weird at first, but this point where we stopped stitching right in here needs to match up with this seam right here. So this might look a little weird if you're uncomfortable with that, or you don't feel like, you know what you're doing. You can always do it by hand. It's much easier that way. The rest just gets matched up as usual, and you're gonna sew as far as you can. The rest we're gonna close by hand. So I hope to, on the other side, just have a teeny tiny bit of space left that I need to close by hand. But I'm gonna start from this side right here, prep everything. So put everything to the inside as far as I can and go over to the sewing machine. Okay, that's how far I got, which is pretty good. Only this small of a space left. So what I will be doing is I am essentially gonna fold 1 centimeter down on both the lining and the facing and pin that in place like that. And that's just gonna make me able to do a little hand stitch right here. Usually, obviously, you would do a blind stitch. I don't find it that necessary, to be honest, because you're not gonna see it anyways. So I'm just gonna do a whip stitch, I think. And I'm gonna start right in that corner where I have to be super careful because I only want to grab that one layer of lining fabric because the other side is not supposed to be attached here. So you don't want to see any stitches on this side. But that's just, in the very first couple of stitches, I can already do a normal whip stitch right here because the second layer is out of the way, like that. Super simple, and just close your section that you left open right here. Okay, another knot, and that hand sewing portion is also done. We can just iron everything here straight and down how it's supposed to look and lay like that. And the last thing that I want to do is also fix the hem facing up, but I'm going to do that by machine. So I'm going to do a stitch in the ditch at every ditch there is essentially, and just sew everything in place and fix it in place like that. Okay, last thing is the buttons and the buttonholes. So I just transferred the placements of my buttons and the buttonholes obviously onto my, in this case, right side. This is where I'm gonna put in my buttonholes. So I marked my center front right here, and now I'm gonna go parallel into the front piece for my buttonhole. I have to check which buttons I want to use. I have some in mind, I think, but I need to double check if that's fine, and that determines the length of the buttonholes. I was thinking these buttons, I think they would look really nice. Not sure if I want to have this vertically or horizontally or diagonally or all of them. I think diagonal would be great. Okay, so I have 2.5 centimeters buttons, and then I'm gonna do 2.8 probably buttonhole. I'll obviously check that and do a buttonhole somewhere else and put them through and so on and so forth. So I'm going to put the buttonholes in, transfer the placements for the buttons, and then hand sew them on because they have that eyelet on the underside, and then the jacket is done. And that's it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed. I am super happy with how the jacket turned out. I already put it on and I love it. Can't wait to actually wear it out and about. If you haven't already, please go ahead and subscribe to my channel and ring the bell so you'll get notified every time that I post. I do every other week in 2025 just to, have a little bit of less stress and, more motivation to go into the projects, and I feel like it's working. So thumbs up for that. Leave a comment for the algorithm, a emoji, a comment about the project, something, doesn't really matter. Just push the algorithm. That would help me out tremendously just to keep videos just like this one coming. If you can't get enough from my projects, I have my socials, obviously. They are linked in the description down below. I am posting loads of stuff on my Instagram stories and obviously also my reels. I do tips and tricks, hacks all around my sewing projects, so if you're interested in any of that, go ahead and check out the links in the description down below. Obviously, pre-order my book if you haven't already. That is a very, very good way to support me and my channel. This is a project I have been working on for a year now, and I'm super happy that it's finally finished. It is released on the 18th of March. Obviously, I'm gonna ship out everything from that point on, or not me, but you know, stores. So pre-order now, that would help me out tremendously. Thank you so much for that. The most direct way to support me obviously is to go over to my Etsy store and purchase this pattern or any other pattern that you enjoy. I have tutorials to all of my designs on my YouTube channel, as well as a step-by-step written instruction manual that you'll get after your purchase, obviously. Also, thank you to my channel members, another way to support me. And with that, thank you so much for watching, and I'm gonna see you next Sunday. Bye guys!